All right, so it's going to be a teaching for women and children. And it's going to be on Hebrews 4 1 through 11 about how we're supposed to keep the Sabbath day. Because a lot of people, they like to say how Jesus is my Sabbath. The Sabbath has been abolished. You no longer have to keep it. It's an option, or a bunch of other stuff that just is not biblical. It doesn't align with the scriptures when Yeshua even himself said that he's Lord of the Sabbath day. So that's, I don't remember. I think it's in Matthew 12, verse 8. He might have said it, and I think it might be somewhere in one of the Gospels, like Mark or something, but he says it, and it's repeated in one of the Gospels, so that's one way we can know, okay, there's something to the Sabbath, because that's the only way you can, even then, I guess that's the only verse you could technically twist to be like, oh, he's my Sabbath, but even then, he says Lord of the Sabbath day, so, like, that's a lot of twisting still you have to do in order to be like, Jesus is my Sabbath, and it's just, again, not biblical at all. And then there's also in Matthew 24 when he's talking about what's going to happen in the end times, because we're in the last days. This is the last generation, the generation of God's wrath. Okay, that's the time frame we're in, and all those things are going to happen, right? And then he says to pray that your flight happen not in the winter and not on the Sabbath day. So that's another indicator we can know, okay, the Sabbath is still forever. He also says, if you love me, keep my commandments. What commandments? Well, if you understand Deuteronomy 18, then you would understand that Yeshua came to preach what Israel desired at Horeb, the life-giving waters, the 10 Commandments. He refreshed those, and he magnified the law. He made it honorable. He didn't do away with it. And I'm trying to think of some other verses, but there's just countless verses to show Sabbath is forever. Even in Exodus 31, the Father says it's a sign between him and the children of Israel, and I think it's like a perpetual covenant or forever or something. There's a verse where it literally says perpetual covenant, and then I think there might be one that says forever. But when you look up sign, it means mark. So instead of us worrying about the mark of the beast, why don't we focus on having the mark of God? Because if you have his mark, so if you have the Sabbath day mark and overall the 10 Commandments, because just in general the commandments are a mark, that's how you know you're his people, if you're keeping the commandments. But if you have that, then you're not gonna basically get deceived, because his spirit of truth will be with you, because the spirit of truth is given to those who love him, given to those who obey him. And this is John 14:15-17 and Acts 5:32. But anyways, the one I want to talk about today is Hebrews 4 1 through 11, because it's really important to understand that this is basically, to summarize it before I read it, it's basically showing if you want to enter that rest, so the millennial reign, because that's what it's symbolic. So like the 7th-day Sabbath is symbolic of the millennial reign, because that's 1,000-year rest. And from what I understand, from what I know in regards to like the scriptures, it seems like that would be the 7,000th year or something, because the 8th day would be new covenant, because that's when you're fully circumcised in the heart, and that's when there's going to be no more sin, no more anything, like you're just going to be keeping the commandments. But before that, the millennial reign happens, because then there's one more purging, basically one little purge, like, because you remember at the end of it he lets Satan out, and then there's still people who get swept away after that, but that's like the last final purge. So there's gonna still be people sinning, and then I think even in Zechariah it talks about the people who won't come up for the feast or something. I can't remember what feast is, but if they don't go up to Jerusalem, it's in Zechariah 14 if you read that. So basically that's also talking about the millennial reign. So it shows that there's still gonna be like some sort of free will. I don't fully understand the millennial reign because there's not a lot in it, but what I do understand is Hebrews 4 is talking about the weekly rest and then the millennial reign, because if you want to enter his rest, the rest that is to come, when everything's gonna get restored, and like, because this is when because we're waiting for the restoration of all things to take place, and that's when it's going to happen in the millennial reign. After everything gets destroyed, then that's when everything's going to basically kind of come back to life, and everything's going to get be the way how it's supposed to be, sort of thing, and then it's the kingdom. But obviously you have to overcome and get into the millennial rest before you get into the kingdom and all these things. But how do you enter? How are you going to enter that rest? Well, you have to enter that weekly rest. You have to be You have, like, it's basically showing if you want to enter his rest, you have to enter the weekly rest. And if you do not enter that weekly rest, like Israel did, then you're not entering the rest to come, and you will not be entering the kingdom. So it's very important that you understand the importance of keeping all the 10 commandments. But again, there's something extra special with the Sabbath, because even Isaiah 56 1-8 talks about, there's gonna be, I think it's like the Gentiles or the strangers, or whoever who lay hold of the Sabbath, that they're gonna have names better than sons and daughters. Like, that's a beautiful promise. Like, who doesn't want to be a part of that promise? Well, if you don't keep the 10 commandments, especially the Sabbath, then you won't be a partaker of that promise. So anyways, I'm gonna now start reading, and I hope what I said so far makes sense. But let us therefore fear, and I'll actually read the verses beforehand, because you know what, Hebrews 3 and 4 actually go together, because it says, for some when they had heard did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, but with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell dead in the wilderness? And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believe not? So we see that they could not enter because of unbelief. And honestly, I like the NKJV, and there's other translations better, because it makes it more clear. The reason they couldn't enter in is because of disobedience, because that is what sin is. When you look at 1 John 3:4, it shows that sin is transgression of the law. It is unbelief, because if you believe in God, you're going to obey him. But if you don't believe, if you're lacking faith, then you're going to be living in sin, right? So that's how you know what sin is. And then I think it's also knowing to do what's good, but then failing to do it. So it's kind of all goes together anyways. But really, Hebrews 3 and 4, they go hand in hand with each other, because this shows that faith equals obedience, and lack of faith equals disobedience, because this is why they couldn't enter. They didn't believe him. They didn't believe, because remember, they kept murmuring against him, like, I thought we were supposed to be going to, like, the land and this and that, but instead this is happening, we're going through the wilderness, all these things, right? But it's like, because why though? Because they kept being disobedient to him. So their children, eventually after that generation, right, died, their children got to enter, but they didn't, because they were stiffening their necks and they weren't listening to his words. They didn't trust him, and they showed it. I think like 10 times he says that they tried, like they tried him or tested him or something, right? So, and that's a big deal. You don't want to be like our ancestors. You want to be like the opposite and be obedient, hearken to his voice. That's why in Hebrews 3:15, this is while it is today. While it is said today, if you will hear his voice. What's his voice? The 10 commandments, the 10 words. And obviously it's whatever he convicts you of, whatever he leads you to do. But ultimately, his voice is the 10 commandments. If you keep those, he's going to be with you. He's going to show you his truth, and like because this is, again, like I was explaining, how you get the spirit of truth. And then what the spirit of truth does, right? It brings things back to remembrance. It leads you and guides you into all the truth and shows you the things to come. But if you're not listening to the spirit of grace, so then you can get the spirit of truth, then you're not going to understand what this book says. But let me keep going. Versus to harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. How would you harden your heart? Well, if you're not listening to his conviction on your heart, then your heart's going to be made like stone. Versus if you let that conviction hit, it's going to hurt, but then it heals. It brings healing. You want that soft heart. You don't want to be in pride. You don't want to be stiff-necked. You don't want to be those things. So this is why it's really important. You understand the importance of listening to God. You have to listen to him. That's the simplest way you can put anything, I guess, is listen to him. Be obedient to him. That's how you love him. If you love God, you'll listen to him. If you love God, you'll do what he says. That's like a simple terms you can put it. And if you don't, then that means you don't love him. That means you don't trust him, right? And he wants his children to trust him. He wants his children to, be heirs, of the promises that he's laid up for those who love him, those who obey him. So now I'm going to read Hebrews 4, and hopefully that will give some more context on kind of what I basically was just explaining. But I wanted to see if there was anything else in Hebrews 3, but honestly it is, I would read both Hebrews 3 and 4, but I'm just going to read, like I said, verses 1-11 with chapter 4. So let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you just need to come short of it. Remember how Moses, he was the meekest or most humble of all men, right? And even he didn't get to enter. Now, I believe, because in Hebrews 11, he's mentioned, I believe he's going to get, be able to get in the kingdom, right? But back then, he wasn't able to enter the land. Why? Because he struck the rock twice. And I think he was supposed to speak to the rock, or I can't remember, but he disobeyed, right? And part of it was because of the people getting him angry. So instead of listening to God so that God could get the glory, right, he ended up striking the rock, or whatever he did, right? But it basically didn't give God the glory that was supposed to happen that day. And because of that, he wasn't able to enter the land. Now, he got to see it, praise God, right? But he didn't get to enter the promised land. And that's the thing, the promised land in today's time, what that represents now is the kingdom, because everything's spiritual. The law is spiritual now. So when you're looking at how Moses didn't enter the promised land, think about it as like Moses didn't. And obviously, like I said, I believe he's gonna be in the kingdom. Like, there's no way like this man's not gonna be in there. But like, imagine that, like, being you and not entering the kingdom, right? Like, you were so close, you were listening so good, right? And that's the thing, Moses, look at how he lived his life after God chose him and woke him up. Like, he lived his life so good, and then boom, like, kind of almost like, I don't even want to say the last second, but it was like, he had that slip up, and it's like, damn, that little thing, which it's like, obviously it's not a little thing, it's kind of like a big thing in God's eyes, right, when you don't obey him. But it's like that thing you would think, oh, like, God would overlook that, right? No, it's like, because he will punish us for our sins, chastise us, and like things like that. But it's like, that's why you want to experience that chastisement, that punishment now and not later, because you want to be an heir and enter into the kingdom. But this is why you really have to keep the 10 commandments. But don't look at it like, oh, I have to do it. And this is something I have to tell myself too. Like, don't look at it like as a thing I have to do. Instead, pray for him to help you to have that heart to want to do it, to want to listen to him, to want to do things his way instead of your own way. Because you don't want to be like Moses. And like, you want to be like Moses when up until that point. You don't want to be like Moses in the sense you strike, you hit the rock twice, and because of that, you come short of entering that rest. Like, instead of doing things God's way, you do things your way. Because of that, you don't get to enter the kingdom. You don't want to be like that. So that's why it's like, let us therefore fear, right? And how do you fear God? You're going to obey him. You're going to show up by the way how you live. You're not going to live the life you once lived. There's going to be change, right? There's going to be a change in your life if you truly love him and you want to do things his way. So this is why you really need to know, okay, what's his voice? What does he want? What does he expect me to do? What he expects, what he requires of us all. 10 Commandments, eating clean, fulfill the royal law. And that means if you love your neighbor as yourself, you're not going to withhold the truth. You're going to share it with others, even if they hate you for it. Because look at what Yeshua did. John 15:12-17, lay down your life for the sake of the brethren. And when you do those things, you're going to be hated. Why? Because just as Yeshua was hated, so will we be, because we preach the truth. We preach what the scriptures say, and people don't like that. They don't want to be convicted. Instead, they would rather just sit in the lie, sit in their comfort, and because of that, many are not going to enter the kingdom. And that's actually the saddest thing ever. It's like, there's people who are we're like, my brothers and sisters and I, like, we're telling you, just do this. It's simple when you just take your emotions, take yourself out of it, and let him lead you. And then you guys, like, it's like you guys really don't understand what you're doing. So that's what makes it so much, like, more sad. But what I like, though, is that people will remember later. Like, that gives me hope. So anyways, I'm gonna keep going before I go too much on a tangent, because this is really about, like, keep the Sabbath. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. So what was the gospel? It was this is the way how you can know they were preached the gospel, because they were told about, because I think even in the book of Exodus, and I think throughout other places, it does mention the promises of Abraham, like the covenant God made with Abraham, right? And what was God's promise? Well, if you walk before me and be therefore perfect, right, then you will be blessed in the sense like many nations are gonna come from you. And not only that, the land part too, because remember he gave him that land, and that land is actually the kingdom. It's Israel. It's what we're all like, the people who really love God are waiting for the kingdom where righteousness and holiness and all those things are gonna be. Right, we're waiting for those things, a new heavens and a new earth, but that hasn't happened yet. But that was a part of the gospel, Abraham's seed. And then and from him comes the seed, Yeshua. And this goes back to Galatians 3, because remember also Moses prophesied of him in Deuteronomy 18, how he would come and preach what Israel desired at Horeb. And then I'm trying to remember what else, but this goes back then to Ephesians 2, covenants of promise. So it's the Abraham covenant, the Horeb covenant, and also the Noah covenant. The Noah covenant was he made a promise he would never flood the earth again, right? But because people are disobedient, and it's not just because, a big part of it is like the disobedience, as you read in Isaiah 66-65, because they're eating pork and all those abominations and doing Christmas and Easter, because it talks about one standing. It's like something about someone being holier than thou attitude and standing behind a tree. And the tree, in this case, represents the Christmas tree, because he hates idolatry. But that's what people are doing today's time, because they would rather do that than listen to God. And because of those things, people are going to be burned up. And this is why the world is going to be destroyed with fire this time. So he's keeping his promise. And a part of it, like I said, is because people are not eating clean. But it's also just the overall, they're just being disobedient to God as well. And the holier than thou attitude, mockers and scoffers. Mockers and scoffers will not inherit the kingdom of God, which is why it's like when his servants are telling you the truth, don't mock and scoff just because you don't understand, or just because, I don't know, whatever the reason is, but it's actually really, it's not good. It's not good for you to do that. But that's how we can know the gospel was preached unto them, because then it was preached unto us. The same thing that they heard with Abraham, that all those stories you read, we now read. But the thing is, in order to understand, you have to keep the commandments. Circumcise your heart, like Abraham did. Abraham had a circumcised heart before he had a circumcised what. But the circumcision outwardly represented the circumcision he already had to begin with. And if you are a part of Abraham's seed, you will live by faith, live by obedience, as Abraham did. And how do we know he lived by faith? Well, when God said, Abraham, come out of that land and go to this, like land, whatever, right? He did it. When God said, okay, Abraham, give up your only son, your son whom you love, just as God gave up his only son whom he loved, Abraham was going to do it. Obviously, we see what happened in that story, and that's Genesis 22. But all these things, this is how we know the gospel was preached unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. They didn't believe in God. They didn't believe his promises. And I think Psalm 78, Psalms 95, and there's definitely a bunch of other Psalms that show they didn't believe in God. They wouldn't listen to his voice. They stiffened their necks, and they showed it not just, like, they showed it with their actions that they didn't believe in him. Because really, when you believe in God, you're going to show it by the way you live. But they showed with their actions they didn't believe, because look at what they kept doing. Look at how they kept getting booted out of the land. Look at how they kept worshiping Baal. All these things. But yeah, the reason why it's not because that there's anything wrong with God or anything wrong with the gospel. Oh yeah, they were also given the commandments, and that's a part of the gospel too. We were brought back to the 10 commandments. This is what Yeshua was prophesied to come to do. But they didn't mix it with faith. They heard it. They heard the good word. They heard the good tidings. They heard the gospel. They heard the refreshing, but they didn't actually hear it. It didn't sink into their heart. They didn't mix it with faith, what they heard, because they didn't trust God. And you don't want to be like them, and that's the thing. A lot of people are going to be like them, which is sad. But anyways, let's keep going. For we which have believed. How do you know you've believed? You will obey. You will listen. You will do what the book says. Do enter into rest. As he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. It goes back to the beginning. In the beginning, he gave us the Sabbath, and it's like, man, to experience Sabbath forever, that would be awesome. But You have to overcome, right? So this is going back also, the next few verses, it literally goes back to Genesis 2. This is how we can know that whoever, and I really believe it's Paul who wrote this, but I have no idea, but whoever wrote Hebrews is showing you you have to keep the Sabbath. It goes back to Genesis 2. Why is he quoting, or yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a he. Why is he quoting all the way back about from the beginning about the Sabbath if it's not about the Sabbath? That's something you have to think about. These are things we have to think about. Why are they quoting from the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament still applies. You cannot understand the New Testament if you do not understand the Old Testament, if you don't read also from the Old Testament and learn from it. And the scriptures even say, like, I think it's even in 1 Peter about, like, stirring up your minds, like, from, like, and it's something with the writings with the prophets, and I don't know, or it could be 2 Peter. I could be mistaking it where that's written, but it's in the book of Peter, and I think even in the book of Romans, how Paul says, like, those stories we read in the Old Testament, those stories are for us to learn from, glean from. So let's learn from our ancestors and do the opposite of what they did. Listen to him and enter into that rest. Okay, so we can enter the rest to come and help others enter into that rest too by preaching the gospel, preaching the truth, preaching the glad tidings and all these things unto them so others can get saved and, you know, be with God. That's the whole point, to be with God forever, right? Who does not want that? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. For he spake in a certain place of the 7th day on this wise, and God did rest the 7th day from all his works, and just as God rested, so are we. He and it's not that, and the thing is, the scriptures show God doesn't need to rest. He did it to set an example for us with what he wants us to do, because he knows he never gets tired. The God of Israel, he doesn't get tired. He doesn't slumber. He doesn't sleep. But he knows we people who are so go need it. We need the rest. You have no idea how much your body needs a rest until you rest. And it's like, damn, like, I didn't know I needed that. Like, I'll give an example. Like, when I go for walks or something, and then I come back home and I, like, sit or lay down, it's like, damn, I really needed this, right? You know what I mean? It's like that, but with the Sabbath, it's, like, even more. Because he knows we have lives. He knows that there's going to be people where, like, you're married, or you have a job, or you're taking care of your house, or family, or whatever it is. We all have something going on, but the 7th day is the one day of the week. You don't have to, I mean, obviously it's not that you still don't take care of your family or whatever it is you're doing, right? But it's one day you don't have to really focus on how crappy the world is. It's the one day you get to fellowship with other brothers and sisters, because everybody's supposed to be resting, so there's no reason to not be. You know, like, where during the week it could be harder to catch up. It's the Sabbath day. It's a perfect day to do that. It's a perfect day to study. It's a perfect day to get in the Word. It's a perfect day to do all these things, you know, versus during the week. And you can still, obviously you should be doing those things during the week, but it's going to be harder to, obviously, because, like I said, if you have jobs, families, all these things, versus the Sabbath day, it's like you just get that one day to just finally, like, okay, God, I can really get in your presence and get filled up with him, so that you can handle the rest of the 6 days until the next day comes. It's almost like, I remember how this guy who I used to watch, like, he was almost like saying, like, the Sabbath, almost like his shot, like his drug sort of thing. And that's how I relate to it. It's like, I'm like, I need my weekly my weekly drug, like, this week, please, like, you know. And that's a good thing. That's how we're supposed to be. But yeah, this is literally, I don't know, it's really a good day. So, and it's not hard, but that's the thing, obviously, that's the thing, you have to be willing to give up your ways. Me and my family, we used to do stuff on the Sabbath all the time. We used to go to malls or go out with our family. That was the day to do stuff, and Sunday. Those were our days of the week to do stuff. But once you follow God, though, it's like, it's not worth your soul. It's not worth eternity. And especially because it's like, damn, one day to rest. Like, we need it. We need the rest. He knows what he was doing when he gave us the Sabbath, okay? Oh yeah, but back to it, like, he doesn't rest, but he knows we do. So he set the example for us so we could do as he did, right? And one day, if we overcome, you know, we get to, I can't even imagine, but anyways, in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, enter into the weekly rest, right? Seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached enter not in because of unbelief. So it's like a mix of talking about the weekly Sabbath, because even back then they fully didn't keep the Sabbath. I think it's somewhere in Jeremiah where how they were like, I don't know if it's Jeremiah 17 where they're doing stuff on the Sabbath, but even back then they weren't doing the Sabbath. And today's time, look at people, they're not doing the Sabbath again either. So it's a mix of the weekly Sabbath, but also again back to the millennial reign, because it's symbolic of that. When they didn't enter the rest back then, the land where they could have rested and have, be in peace and have nothing to worry about with their enemies or anything like that, just live like, you know what I mean? Like, but I'm getting too off topic. Okay, I'm gonna get back to focus on this. But they again entered in not because of unbelief. They couldn't enter in. The unbelief, the disobedience, the sin kept them from entering the land, entering the kingdom. Like when you look at it like that, like look at that like yourself, like, okay, check yourself, prove yourself. Are you really walking and living in the faith of, are you really acting like Yeshua? Check yourself to see if, I think there's a scripture where it says something about checking yourself to see if you're really in the faith, or something with Paul, something like that. But it's like, really, how are you living? See if your life aligns with the Messiah. If it doesn't, then that means there's changes that have to be made. So anyways, again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time as it is said, today, if you'll hear his voice, harden not your hearts. And that's the thing, where no one's promised tomorrow. If today you hear that conviction, hear that grace calling you, pouring out onto you, listen, you're not promised tomorrow. You have no idea if you'll die in your sleep. You have no idea if a car will hit you. You have no idea if you got cancer. You have no idea what your life will be, because there's some people who be like, oh, maybe tomorrow, or maybe next week, or maybe in a few years I'll follow him, or maybe. It's like, no, don't wait. Don't wait, because you don't want to be like those people who waited and then it was too late. And then you're like, oh my God, I should have listened. You don't want to be a part of those people. So if today you hear his voice, harden not your heart, listen to him. If he's calling you, listen to his calling and enter into the work of a servant. Okay? It's going to be hard. I'll tell you. It's like, there's days where I'm like, damn, like, this is tough talking to people who just don't listen. But it's like, I didn't listen at one point. It's also like the scriptures say that because they don't listen to him, they're not going to listen to you. So it's really him they're not. But it's tough because it's like, damn, you just want people to listen. But I can't make you listen. If God can't make you listen, how can I? Miriam make you listen, but that's the whole point. The whole point so they remember later. So do it. Do it now while you have time. Okay? For if Yeshua had given them rest. Well, actually, it's actually Joshua. It's supposed to be Joshua here. For if Joshua, because this was back then, again, Moses' time and stuff. So for if Joshua had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken of another day? So if they, that's the thing. So now this is talking about in regards to the kingdom. Because remember, they might have got a little bit of time, but because they kept going back, right? They never really had true rest because of their disobedience, their unbelief. They didn't really enter that rest. But now, you know what I mean? Like, but anyways, there remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. What do you think the author of Hebrews is talking about? It says, remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. It's talking about that weekly rest, that Sabbath day rest. It remains. It has not gone away, and it never will go away. It's one of the 10 commandments, and it has been established forever. Forever. Perpetual covenant is not temporary. It's literally means forever. All right, almost done. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief, disobedience. Remember 1 Corinthians 10, how he's giving all these examples. They fornicated, they went after idols, they did this, they were testing God, they murmured, they grumped, all these things, like these examples, these stories we see. It's all examples of who you don't want to be, because if you do those things, you won't enter the kingdom. Also, Galatians 5, it talks about, again, with the fornication, all those things. And I'm trying to remember what else, but Paul, reiterates, don't do those things. It's why? Because that will keep you from entering the kingdom of God. You don't, it's like, again, today while you hear his voice, harden not your heart and let us labor. How do you labor? Let his conviction work in you. Because remember how Paul says, like, it's no longer him who labors, but the one laboring in him. Or it's something like that. I don't know if actually he says he no longer labors, but it's really God's grace convicting him. He is who he is because of it, and that's who you want to be as well. But it's like, okay, today, if you hear his voice, harden not your heart, enter that rest. Because if you do the 10 commandments now, if you eat clean now, if you go warn your neighbors to do so now before tribulation hits, there's a promise that possibly you can get hid from that day. But also, if you overcome and endure till the end, as Yeshua said, not only could you be saved, but even those who hear you, even your family, even if your family might not hear, because for his servant's sake, he won't destroy them all. So if you do this now, it's not even just about your own salvation, but the salvation of those around you, whether family, whether strangers, whether home, whoever it is, whoever is around you. If you learn the truth now and then give them the truth, you can possibly help people get saved because of that, because of your obedience to God, just because you obeyed him and stuff. There could be people who later in tribulation remember what you told them because you were faithful in what you heard and you told them. And they'll be like, oh my God, I wish I should have listened. And then they'll remember what to do. And then there's that whole promise with the tribulation saints who they didn't do the work now. So then they get to another opportunity in tribulation, because that's, even though it's like such a terrible thing, tribulation that's gonna be coming and trying the whole world, it's also one of his greatest acts of mercy too, because even up in tribulation, people get to repent in tribulation and listen to him and have kind of almost like, some of them will have teeth on the cross moments, right? But it's gonna be so much. The thing is, you don't want to wait till then, because it's gonna be 10 times harder versus if you do now. It's gonna be hard now, okay? I'm not gonna lie and sugarcoat and be like, oh yeah, it's like the easiest thing in the world. Like, no, like I said, even I myself have my own struggles with it, where it's like, it's tough talking to people day in day out who just won't hear, because their hearts go after their covetousness, because they bother the ways of this world, or whatever it is that's keeping you from like just doing what the book says. It's tough, it's hard, it hurts, you mourn, you cry, you want to scream, you want to like flip out. But if you do these things now, there's a promise, there's a crown like waiting for you if you overcome, if you endure till the end. Like, his promises are not for those who disobey him. His promises are for those who love him and also love his people. You can't just love God and expect to enter the kingdom. 1 John literally shows, if you don't love your brother, and that could be anyone, you don't love your neighbor as yourself, then you don't actually love God, because how can you love God whom you've not seen if you don't even love your neighbor who you do see? You know what I mean? So if you want to enter that rest, go, learn for yourself first. Like, let him teach you, let him show you. And then the little that he shows you, be faithful with it, and then go proclaim it. You don't need to know 125 million things still in order to get saved, like, and all this stuff. You just need to be faithful with what you heard and just go do it. If all you'll ever know is the 10 commandments, eating clean, royal law, if that's all you'll ever know, and warning people to repent of tribulation, all you ever know is the gospel, then go proclaim that, go share that. Because the whole point of this is actually, again, the whole point is not so I can get saved, but so others can get saved just because of my obedience. Like, that's the thing, you don't know if you wake up one person, one person could wake up so many. Like, you just don't know. Like, you're gonna reach who you reach. That's the point. It's out of your control who wakes up and who doesn't. But it's just do it now. Enter that rest now. But I hope this makes it clear. You have to keep the Sabbath. Okay? It's like, that's the thing. Like, if you ever start feeling like it's a burden, it's not because it is, because you're not obeying in faith. There's something you're doing to make it burdensome. And I'm saying this because this was something my brother shared on one of the Sabbath spaces, and it's something that even I myself was starting to do. And the reason why for me I can say at one point I wasn't really feeling like Sabbath was because I was, not that it's bad, it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath day. So if you see like a sheepy needs help, or like, you know, things like that, it's lawful to do good, go help, right? But I was overly doing it where I wasn't really resting, you know, and that's for me why it was starting to feel like, oh man. And I was even wondering, like, why am I feeling like this about the Sabbath day? Like, this is the Sabbath. Like, I'm usually so excited, but this week I'm like, oh man. It's like, no. Like, I'm not gonna tell you don't do the work. Do the work however he leads you, but make sure you get that rest, because that's the whole point of the Sabbath. Okay, is to get that rest, get that time with him, get that time with your brothers and sisters. You need it. Okay, but anyways, I'm gonna end this now because this is really long. But I really hope this convicts a woman to start keeping the Sabbath.